on your video cameras. Thank you. So we have about 13 of us here, and hopefully a couple more will join. So yesterday we had interesting presentations from 5 teams on the farm electronics case, and I've written up my notes and assigned a grade to every team out of 5, and you can find that in my courses under the course notes. So you'll be able to see, and that's pretty much the default grade for every member of the team. Okay, so you'll get 1 grade for the whole team. If you have any questions or concerns about your grade, you can, ask for a consult with me by email during office hours. But I do want to give you the immediate feedback. Also, I'm going to read all your case memos, and it'll take me a few days to give you feedback on that, but I'll definitely get it back to you by the end of the week so that you have the feedback before you write the second case memo. Today's agenda is that we have 2 chapters to discuss, 2 theory chapters. Chapter 6, which is on segmentation, targeting, and positioning, and chapter 7 is on market communication. And you also had to do some homework on each of them. So let's start out with looking at some homework answers for chapter 6. So I'm going to go there. And share my screen. So these were the questions that everybody, all the teams had to answer.
At least my team thought that those were for tomorrow, because it said in the syllabus that like post by 6 p.m. the next day.
Yeah, we also thought it was tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah,
My team.
No, you're right. It does say the next day, so it's due by tomorrow. Okay, so we shall not discuss that, right? You can do it today for tomorrow. Instead, we can go on to the theory chapter on chapter 6. But before I get into that, are there any other questions or administrative issues that you would like to bring up? So I'm going to do a quick roll call here. Please answer to your name. Hafiz is here. Yes.
Yes.
Anton.
I'm here.
Okay. Redwan sent me an email that he will not be here. Ella.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Eric.
I'm here.
Okay. Daniel.
Here.
Okay. Simal.
Here.
Okay. Rasmus.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. Kalle. Kalle doesn't seem to be here. Emma.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Elisa.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Alexi.
Yep, here.
Thank you. Sarah Maria.
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you. Thin.
Yeah, I'm here.
Jade.
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you. And G. G is not here. All right. So now I'm going to go into chapter 6. Okay, so I'm sure you've studied these concepts of segmentation, targeting, and positioning before in some of your previous marketing classes. Let's start out with tell me what is your understanding of what segmentation is, and you can put this in the chat or you can tell me by unmuting your microphone. The first thing to we're starting out with is just what are your general understandings of what segmentation is, and then we'll get into some specific aspects of B2B segmentation. I'm sure you remember a little bit from your previous courses or even from actually from Petri's presentation. There were examples of segmentation. So can anybody volunteer to give me some response? What is your understanding of what segmentation is?
Well, isn't segmentation basically just like dividing something into subcategories? For example, customers or possible customers, consumers, dividing them into different groups, smaller groups.
Yes, it's not anything, but it is primarily customers, right? In marketing, we are only talking about putting customers into groups. But what is the purpose of that, Rasmus? Why do we do that?
Is it to like cause some products shouldn't be like marketed for everyone, so it's like target specific customer groups?
That's right. So we don't waste our efforts, right? If you were to address everybody, including those who are not interested in your products, that would be wasteful, right? And secondly, anybody else? What else? Why? What is the purpose of segmentation? That's an important one that Rasmus mentioned. But what's another reason why we do segmentation in marketing? We don't want to waste our resources, right? So another important aspect is that customers' needs change over time. Initially, we are happy with some standard offering, right? If we've never used something before, when we get the first version of it, everybody seems to make do. But as we get familiar with it, as we, like it more and more, we develop some different needs or preferences, which maybe that's a sign of the market evolution, right? There's markets which are quite in an emerging state. We talked about India, for example, in the farm electronics case, or countries in Africa. They are developing countries, right? Over there, if you come out with some basic product that they've never had access to, they will buy it, the same one. Everybody will say, oh, what a nice car, you know. The first time maybe the car was introduced in these markets, everybody would say, what a wonderful invention. But as they get familiar with driving a car and the various, uses to which a car can be put, a car can be used for family travel, a car can be used for carrying goods, right? Some version of a car, then the customer needs become more sophisticated and then they fragment. And after some time, people say, no, I don't want that same thing. You know, I'm more wealthy, I can afford things more, so I want something different, right? So apart from the efficiency argument for segmentation is this notion that inherently, as customers evolve economically, they do want different things and they are willing to pay for it. Doesn't matter if it costs more, right? So you combine those two, segmentation is not only efficient from a cost standpoint because there's less waste, but you're also effectively meeting the needs better of people. Okay. Any other thoughts on your understanding of segmentation? So I'm going to draw a diagram here. I hope you guys can see it. I'm going to try my document camera for the first time. Are you able to see this circle that I've drawn? Right, now can you see a little circle there on the screen? Right?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So think of this as a marketplace. It might be a country or a region, and then you divide it into slices of a pie, like a pizza, right? And you have so many different segments, A, B, C, D, E. You have 5 segments, right? So a whole market can be divided where within each segment the customers have similar needs and across segments they have different needs. So this is the segmentation exercise. Now, what is targeting? Any thoughts? If you can keep telling me in terms of this diagram, what is targeting?
Targeting would be focusing on a specific segment. Right?
Yes, thank you, Eric. So targeting is a spending decision. How much do you want to spend and on whom do you want to spend? So you might say, okay, here D looks like the largest segment. So in our first year of launch, we are only going to target segment D, right? And then when we do well in D, then we'll go to the next larger segment C, which will be in the following year. Remember, this is what you did in farm electronics, we said type A customers are a priority, right? That was the customers you want to target for new acquisition right away. Then later you want to go to type B, and maybe later you want to go to public sector undertakings. And I think the consensus was we should not go to C and D customers at all because they're not going to be profitable. So, this is what targeting is. It's the next step after segmentation. Segmentation is dividing the whole market into segments so that you cover every part of the market and you evaluate every segment. But then targeting is a resource allocation decision. Which segments am I going to serve? It depends on your resources, it depends on your talents and capabilities and strengths, right? And then what is positioning? The third step of this chapter is going to talk about positioning. So, who can tell me what positioning is?
I guess it's sort of how a company will present itself in terms of what they're providing and who they're providing it to.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. So it is the perception that you want the market to have of your offering relative to competitors. So in D there may be two competitors, X and Y. These are companies X and Y that both have products targeting D. Then if they are the same, if their offerings are the same, they're going to just get 50% of the market each. But if they want to get competitive advantage, then it behooves each to say how they are different and better than the other, right? So going back to farm electronics might say in terms of the type A customers, if that segment D is type A customers, then farm electronics might say we have better quality and better customer service than our competitor Y. And that positioning has to be drilled into the minds of the customers so that it stays there. It has to do with communication. It has to do with repetition. You have to be consistent and repetitive in conveying your positioning to the market, and then they will remember. Just like if you were to consider retailing, the a different industry, in your mind, who is which one of the retailers is really high end in customer service? Any thoughts? Who do you think, which retailer is really very good in customer service? Or just in the physical store atmosphere? Which store do you like to visit, pre-COVID, before all this happened? If you were to, just have a wonderful experience going shopping offline, which retailer would you like to go to? Yes, Eric?
No, it was just a shrug. I don't really know. I'm not really.
Have any of you
Store-
been
all
to an
stores are
Apple-owned
stores.
store, a company-owned Apple store? I don't think there may be one in Finland, but in some of the large cities of the world, you go to London, Paris, New York, Istanbul, they all have company-owned Apple stores, and the experience really is quite fantastic. So Apple has positioned itself as a very high-end retailer of phones and computers. That's the kind of, and it repeats itself by duplicating that experience in every store that it opens, right? And people get that through the experience. So it is communicated and it's repeated. That's how the positioning sticks, at least in my mind. And that's the same thing that we try to do in B2B marketing. So let me go back to my own camera, right? So remember, we've just been through STP, which is the holy grail of marketing: segmentation, targeting, positioning. This is the pillars of marketing strategy. If anybody asks you what is marketing strategy, it is not the 4 P's. It is not product, price, place, and promotion. The higher order marketing strategy is segmentation, targeting, and positioning. And the 4 P's, product, price, place, and promotion, are just ways or tools that the marketeer has to implement the positioning. The conceptualization at a higher abstract level is the STP. And then on the ground, the implementation is achieved through the 4 P's. Do you see the interrelationship between marketing strategy and marketing tactics? The 4 P's are more tactical. You can change things like product and promotion and things like that. But the strategy, the segmentation, targeting, and positioning has to be durable over a longer period of time. The definition of strategy is something that is costly, irreversible, and lasts a long time. Okay? When you choose a strategy, it has to be costly because you have to invest in it. Okay? It's largely irreversible. I won't say it's totally irreversible. You can change strategy. But again, it is largely irreversible because you're committing to it for a longer period of time. Okay? Typically in marketing, we say that the strategy has to be at least 1 year or longer. Okay? And then the 4 P's, they can change even within a year from quarter to quarter. Okay? Any thoughts or comments? So it's important for us to see the interrelationship between the strategy, which we are now going to study, and then later the chapters will focus on the 4 P's, which are the ways to implement the strategy. So now I want to go back to chapter 6. So let's look at some slides, and again, please do interrupt me if you need any clarifications or have some questions. So we've gone over this, that usually the entire market is heterogeneous, but you try to establish slices of homogeneity. And why do we do that? It is important for the next step of targeting. Unless you do a complete segmentation mapping, you might miss out on some opportunities. And if you can do that correctly, you will solve customer problems, you'll meet their needs, and they'll be happy to pay you what you ask for, and you will be profitable. So it's a win-win, but you have to do it correctly. And many companies do miss the boat on this. Now, this is the challenging part about B2B segmentation. You can choose many different variables on how to slice and dice a market, right? There are macro variables like firmographics. That's a cut and paste of firm demographics. Firm demographics are like location, size, age of the company, right? Just like human beings have, our demographics are like our age, our gender, right? All the descriptive, observable things. Operating variables are what kind of processes or technology are our customers using? Can we use that as a basis for dividing up the market. Purchasing approach, can we categorize our customers on the basis of their purchasing approach? You remember in an earlier chapter, we saw that some companies have just a buying orientation where they are focused on low cost. Some companies are more sophisticated, they want value. And then there are other customers who have a procurement or supply chain mindset, right? So those are purchasing approaches. And then situational factors are exigencies. They just come up. Suddenly there's an urgent need for something, right? This happened at the beginning of COVID in March 2020 when we were suddenly short of things like protective equipment, gloves, hand sanitizer, wipes, right? So those are situational factors. And then since the companies and the decision making units are made of people, then the personal characteristics of those people will also affect how we do the segmentation. Okay, so this is the complexity of B2B marketing. There are so many different variables to choose from, and which ones are the most appropriate, that's something that we have to pay attention to. So I think I don't need to go over this again. Just please read it and tell me if you have any issues with this. This is what firm demographics or firmographics are about. Very often when we talk about organization size, we like to segment the market as small business, medium business, and large business, right? And there are various criteria the government may have of how to define what's a small business, what's a medium business, what's a large business. You might take employee size as the measure of organization size, or you could take sales turnover or revenue as the organization size metric as well. Okay. Now this we've seen before. It was the standard industrial classification code. This defines the industry of your customer. This is also an important aspect of firmographics. And I want to go over this example in a little bit of detail. So let's say you're a manufacturer of some equipment that can be sold to ceramics manufacturers. Ceramics is something that is used in many industrial applications as well as consumer applications, right? So let's think that you're a company that makes furnaces for ceramics, and you want to sell into this NAICS code 327120, which are all the companies that use clay building material and do refractories manufacturing. So essentially these are companies that are manufacturing some ceramic products. Okay. So you go into this database which is maintained by the government. NAICS is in North America. It's common to USA, Mexico, and Canada. But you also have a similar thing in the European Union and in the UK. It's basically a standard industrial classification code. So in the government database, you find that there are 17,834 companies under this category who are potentially your market. Okay. But then you may say that, the equipment or the foundry that we sell is expensive. So we don't want to target any company. We want to target only those companies that have a sales turnover of $50 million or more. So you apply this filter to the database and you come up with, there are 374 companies worldwide with a turnover in excess of $15 million in this NAICS code. So you have just narrowed down your potential market. But then you say, okay, these companies are distributed all over the world. I only, given my resources, I only want to target those countries which have 16 or more of these companies. Okay, so you apply another filter to the database and you come up with, there are 7 countries which have 16 companies with more than 50 million turnover and NAICS code 327120. These are the 7 countries: Italy, Brazil, Japan, China, Spain, Germany, and USA. And each of them has more than 16 companies. USA has just 16 and Italy has 39. And then you expand the one in Brazil. Brazil has 33 companies, but these are some of the names: Magnesita, PGB, Pyrotech, Gresset Industrial, Casa Grande. So if there was more screen real estate, you would have seen a listing of 33 companies. But now you see, I know exactly who my target is. If I want to target this segment, I have a list of companies. They become my prospects. So I can go to their website, find out who's the contact person. I can go to LinkedIn, right? I can send them a message. If I can find out who the purchasing manager is, that's even better, right? This is the kind of homework that salespeople have to do in B2B sales. Find out, your overall marketing group at headquarters might tell you the criteria that we only want to target companies in countries which have 16 or more companies with $50 million or more sales turnover in this NAICS. But as a good salesperson, you will have to find out which are those companies and how can I go and reach out to them proactively. So let me pause here and see if there's any comments in the chat or any questions that you might have on firmographics. Okay, I don't see any, so I'll go back here and go to the next slide. Operating variables. So again, you remember that big, concentric circles of variables that might be used. So now we are from the macro firmographics, we are going to what are the operating variables that our customers can be segmented by. So what's the technology that the customers are using? In many industries, there are different types of technologies that are being used. If I was a computer company like Apple or Samsung, I would like to know whether my customers are already using Windows or are they using Apple, right? If, for example, the market is full of Apple customers, then it may not be easy for Samsung to target them, right? So that is, and again, it depends on other types. In Petri's presentation, he is very interested in what technologies are the customers using for flight simulation, for example. There are many airlines and many defense departments all over the world, right? Some of them are using VR, some of them are using AR. So Vario wants to target those companies that are more sophisticated, and perhaps they want to target the customers who use AR to move them up to the next level of XR, which is Vario's current offering, mixed reality. Okay. You can also have operating variables like what products and brands are the customers using. So you might want to target your existing customers, or you might want to target customers who are not using your product, a different brand. So that might be a specific marketing campaign to attract competitors' customers to you. What are the customers' capabilities? What kind of financial resources they have, what kind of knowledge and skills they have. And you could also segment customers by the strategic type. Are they prospectors? Prospectors are innovators. They are on the leading edge of their industry in trying out new things. Okay. As opposed to that, reactors are followers. They don't take the first step in embracing something new, but they follow in the footsteps of the prospector. A defender is a company that likes to defend its position. If it's low cost, then they like to keep everything low cost, like Ryanair or Amazon, right? And then the analyzer is a company that has strengths in using data and algorithms and analysis to come up with some niche or some unserved markets or some way of differentiating that's different than the other competitors. So these are some different ways to segment markets with operating variables. Then you can segment your customers by the type of purchasing organization though they have. How sophisticated is their purchasing organization? Is it a buying orientation? Is it a procurement orientation? Or is it a supply chain orientation? Power structures. Who within the decision making unit has the power? Is it the engineers who are making the decisions, or is it the finance people who have the power to make the decisions? You can segment on that basis. You can segment on the basis of what kind of relationships do your customers want with you. Do they want just an arm's length relationship, or do they want a really collaborative, cooperative, long-term relationship? What are their purchasing policies? Some customers, like the government, they might have an open bidding system with tenders. And then private type A customers, like farm electronics type A customers, they might have a closed bidding process, right? So what are the different ways that they implement their purchasing policies? And then purchasing criteria, this is so important. Are they going to emphasize quality? Are they going to emphasize specifications? Are they going to want more just low cost customer service? What is it that is dominant in terms of their purchasing criteria? So this is how you could segment again using the organizational purchasing approach. And then there is the situational factors. These come up quite suddenly. Somebody has an urgent need, the customer, there's a shortage, so they contact you and say, please, can you give me some product? I don't mind paying higher prices. This is important because businesses have to keep their operations running. They can't shut down. And then scale of need. Sometimes customers themselves are scaling up and they may want a second supplier because their first supplier could not fulfill their commitment in delivering the number of units needed. So these are situational factors that might arise from time to time, and you can segment the market as, okay, urgent customers versus non-urgent customers. And then the personal characteristics of the buyers. What's motivating them, uh, is the buyer trying to, if they make a success of this purchasing project, will they be promoted and get praised within the organization? So how motivated are they to succeed, right? What is their risk perception? Are they conservative or are they innovative? You can segment on that basis. Relationship style, again, do they want a long-term collaborative relationship or not? And the final thing is, do they have a similar worldview to us or a view of strategy? If we are a prospector as a supplier, are they also a prospector as a customer? Right? And of course, all of this, if you want to get down to this level of micro segmentation, you have to get access to all the members of the decision making unit and you have to get to know them well. So one thing to note is that the macro approaches are a little bit easier. Firmographics, you can observe, you can get data on that from databases. But as you go deeper into the micro level approaches, it takes up a lot more effort, time, and money to get at these micro level approaches. So you have to decide whether these additional micro level approaches, whether they are warranted or not, the additional investment. But if you are able to do some micro segmentation, what you can then arrive at is what is called a business persona. And if you recall, even Petri alluded to this. They have potentially 9 different segments for Vario. They have the hardware products for VR, AR, and XR. There are 3 product areas that Vario specializes in. And then they have 3 customer segments. There's the consumers who are more into video and entertainment. There are the prosumers, the professional consumers who, they are still into things like simulation and video games, but much more sophisticated than ordinary consumers. And then there are the enterprise or business customers. So Vario has potentially 3 times 3, 9 different segments or product markets. And then he said that you can get down to the persona in each segment. What's the profile of a consumer who uses VR, or what's the persona or profile of an enterprise customer that's interested in XR. So this figure 6.3 is a buyer persona. That this is an example of a company doing a segmentation using personal characteristics, and they found that there are many companies which have individuals like Tony, the transformational leader, and they want to target companies who have similar types of people like Tony. And you can see the amount of detail collected about this persona. What's their age and their education, what's their mindset, what's their frustration and anxieties, right? If you can understand what are the frustrations and anxieties of your buyers, and if you as a salesperson can address those frustrations and anxieties, then you can really tilt the product specifications in your favor before the call for proposals is published. So again, let me pause here and see if there's any comments in the chat, or you guys have any thoughts and reactions to macro versus micro approaches to segmentation. So you can see that some of the things in the macro approaches do apply to consumer marketing, right? Demographics applies to consumer marketing. But when you get down to operating variables, there you don't segment the consumer market by using operating variables, right? We do develop personas even in consumer marketing, right? We say Jane Doe, a soccer mom. A soccer mom is a persona, lives in the suburbs and, drives a minivan and takes the kids to play soccer on the weekends, right? Well educated, affluent, quite liberal in their thinking. So we have consumer personas and then we have business buyer personas as well. So I want you to see that there are some overlaps, but also some important differences in B2B segmentation from B2C segmentation. All right. We can continue. Here are some of the challenges. So, segmentation is done by some marketing group at some headquarters level. This is like Petri and the 5 people who are in marketing at Vario. And then they have the 35 salespeople, right? The salespeople are trained about the segmentation, targeting, and positioning. And then they have to go out in the field and translate that positioning into simple messages that they can communicate to their customers, business customers, on a one-to-one basis. So the challenges of B2B segmentation are mainly in the translation from what it is that the marketing guys want conveyed to actually what's happening in the relationship between the seller and the buyer. Ideally, there should be consistency, right? It's the marketing guys who've done the analysis and the research to come up with some effective segmentation, targeting, and positioning. But then the salespeople have to buy into it. If they themselves don't believe in the positioning, then they're not going to be able to convey it to their customers. So that's what most of these challenges are about. In segmentation, we assume that within a target segment, the customers are homogeneous. But in practice, the salespeople might find that even within the same segment, the customers have different needs. Okay. And they get to that when they interact with their customers. The suppliers find out that, okay, even among type A customers, there might be differences between customer X and customer Y. And then again, because it's a two-way communication process, right? Not only is the salesperson telling the customer what their positioning is, but the customer is also very vocal in saying, no, that's not right. All this time you've been doing things a little differently. Now you're deviating too much. I want to stick to the old positioning. So give me what old products you had. Don't rock my boat. Okay. So these are the things where the implementation of the segmentation might not go exactly according to the marketing plan. Right. Here are some more issues. If the customers want more customization, then that's complex and it costs a lot for the company to deviate from standard offerings. customers often want to interact with a variety of channels. So as on the marketeer side, you have to make sure that you're communicating with them through all the different channels. And of course, although we did say that marketing strategy is long term, if the market structure changes, if competition and technology changes, then every 3 to 5 years you might need to change your segmentation, targeting, and market and positioning. Okay, so remember that you want it to be long term, but at the same time you have to be flexible. Think about how all the companies had to suddenly adapt to COVID. Today we are in Zoom. Zoom was a company that existed 3-4 years before COVID, but there were other competitors. There was WebEx and some other offerings for video conferencing. But the thing about Zoom was always ease of use. Some ex-employees left Cisco WebEx to start Zoom 3-4 years before COVID hit, and they got into the university market. I was actually using Zoom in my university at least 3-4 years before COVID. It was extremely user friendly compared to the other offerings. But then when COVID hit, then Zoom had to transition to B2B in a very big way, from consumer to B2B, right? They had to increase their capacity. They had to, initially, if you remember, there were security issues with Zoom. People were doing what's called Zoom bombing. They would interrupt a meeting and in the background they would put all kinds of negative comments and things like that. That was called Zoom bombing, if you remember. So then Zoom had to pay attention to that in B2B markets. They had to tighten up. They had to improve the security of their product. So that's an example where the strategy had to change for Zoom from B2C more into B2B. And then they rose to the occasion, right? Peloton is a company that makes exercise equipment, right? They were there before COVID, but suddenly when COVID hit, they saw the trend that people are not going out and not going to gyms. So they made a big campaign to position Peloton as a stay-at-home exercise machine, and their sales went through the roof, right? Company like Uber changed their segmentation, targeting, and positioning because people stopped going out during COVID. Then Uber became more of a food delivery company, delivering food from restaurants to the home. So again, you see how these pivots happen. Strategy is intended to be long term, but definitely if the environment changes, then you have to be agile and flexible and pivot. And then you can survive and you can thrive. Okay. Now, what do you need to do good segmentation? So management must be committed to the process. This requires a lot of investment. You have to collect data, you have to do market research, right? So you have to have a certain infrastructure. You have to have an MIS system. In order to, mine the data and get the insights, you need to have good computer infrastructure. You need to have adequate processes, right? What kind of data do you have will dictate what kind of variables you choose for segmentation. If you don't have data on your buyer's characteristics, then you will stick to more macro approaches. So these are some of the things you have to have in place before a company can do good segmentation. Usually startups and small businesses don't have this kind of infrastructure. Mainly it's available in larger enterprises. Right. Now, once you've done the segmentation, you have to make a decision on your offering. Are you going to have an undifferentiated offering? Offer the same thing to all segments. Now, that makes little sense. But if you have limited resources or you're a startup, you might have done the segmentation for the future, but you might say that version 1 of our product will be undifferentiated, and in future years we will get into more differentiation for different segments. So you have to make a choice here on, what kind of offering do you want to launch in the marketplace. Now, again, this is a flow chart which tells you the process for how to select good segments. So let's say you've identified a segment, then you have to assess its attractiveness. Is it large? Is it growing? Is it going to provide us with a good return? Right? Then you ask, do we have the resources to serve this segment well? Do we have the strengths and capabilities? Right? Then you have to make some demands of the management and the organization. We need some resources. We might need to hire, different managers for different segments. So all of this will then ultimately result in a go, no go decision to proceed. Okay, so that was it in terms of chapter 6. Again, any thoughts, questions, clarifications on segmentation? Can you now think of some examples of companies that do B2B segmentation? I gave you some. Can you think of others? Any experience you've had with how companies in perhaps Finland or whichever country you are in, how do they do B2B segmentation? Take airlines, Finnair. Finnair does segmentation for the consumer market and for the business market. That's the first segmentation, right? The consumer market gets probably gets lower fares, and there are more promotions from time to time, right? Especially in summer holidays, or even in winter. I know a lot of my Finnish friends like to go to Southern Europe in the winter time, Spain and Portugal, right? So you can offer specific prices and promotions for the consumer market, also known as leisure travel, Leisure, leisure. And then there's the business market which is much less price sensitive, right? And typically some airlines, I don't know whether Finnair has both business class and first class. So that's a segmentation for business customers. First class has normally got more services and higher price than business class, right? So that's the way of doing segmentation. Many of the larger well-performing companies will say that top executives can fly first class, and some other companies will say, no, we can't, a certain level of executives can't go first class, but they can go business class, especially if they are traveling long distances. to China or India, right? Long flights. Then you might want to, many companies do pay for their executives to travel business or first class because they want them to be rested well before they can get into those business negotiations with a new customer, right? So again, always try to think of examples of your own, right? Any other thoughts about B2B segmentation? If not, we'll take our 5-minute break now, and please come back at 6 past the hour. Thank you. So before the break, we were talking about segmentation, targeting, and positioning, which I said was the 3 cornerstones of marketing strategy. Now we are ready to get into the 4 P's, which is how we implement the positioning, right? As Daniel mentioned, positioning is how do you want customers to think about your product in relation to competitors? What's unique? What's memorable? What's the value? What are the benefits? Right? These are what we need to convey to our customers. And how do we do that? It's through all the 4 P's. The next chapter, chapter 7, is going to focus on the communication or promotion aspect, one of the P's. And I think that particular P, communication, is most important for positioning. What do we want to say? How do we want to say it? Where do we want to say these things, right? So that's where we're going to focus on in this chapter. So let me go to the slides now. And again, please do interrupt me. Feel free to comment in the chat, raise questions, ask for examples, whatever helps to increase your understanding. Okay, we start with the topic. I'm sure many of you are interested in branding. We're very familiar with brands in a consumer context. I'm sure we all buy merchandise that we are very brand conscious for some particular items, right? Just as an example, I have been only buying Apple PCs and phones and devices since 1987. Okay, that's when I was a student. I came to the US from India, and the only computers that were in the lab in Berkeley were Macintosh. You know, Apple had actually donated free computers to Berkeley, and we could use them. Actually, we had a mix of both Windows and Apple computers, and I was used to using actually they were not Windows, they were MS-DOS. I used to use the first PCs in India before I came to the US, which were based on the DOS operating system, which was very clunky. You had to type out a lot of long commands. Okay, and so compared to that, the Apple was so much easier to use. And so now, what is it, since 1987, that's about a 24-year relationship with Apple. Can you imagine the amount of money they've made from me, right? There's a concept called customer lifetime value, right? And I'm sure, my customer lifetime value to Apple must be in excess of $100,000 based on all the things that I've bought for them. So that's an example in the consumer context. But now we are talking about business brands. And the important thing here is that, again, in B2B marketing, we are more interested in building the corporate brand name, not the product brand. Okay, so you know all of these companies, whether it's Apple, Samsung, you know, Amazon, right, Facebook, they all have their corporate name, which is a brand, but they also have products, and the products have their own brands. I think in B2B marketing, the whole investment is first in the corporate brand. Over a period of time, that has to be the strongest brand. And you know, some of the models, if you see, they have their own names, but the things that change very frequently have model numbers. So iPhone 10, 11, 12, you know, the numbers keep changing every year. Or Galaxy also has Samsung Galaxy 9, 10, 11. So when things change frequently at the model level, there's no point in giving a brand name. But at the product level and at the corporate level, that's where the brand investment has to take place more. And are you guys familiar with a survey called Interbrands? Let me ask this in the general thing. Have you heard of Interbrand survey? Interbrands? No. Let me go there, and it's very interesting. So I'm going to find this on Google. Just trying to get to the right page. Okay, here it is. So I'm going to share this with you. So this is a company called Interbrand. It's a global branding company, and every year it does a survey where it sends questionnaires to the different companies, and it asks them to fill in a lot of details, especially financial projections. You know, how much revenue do you think this brand is going to make next year? And what is it going to cost? So it's a very sophisticated financial calculation, and they actually compute a number called the brand value, which has a dollar value. And if the brand were to be sold as an asset, then that could be a benchmark for negotiation for the acquisition price of the brand. At any rate, this is the survey which lists all the top brands. Apple is number one, and this is for 2020. Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Samsung, Coca-Cola, Toyota, Mercedes, McDonald's, and Disney. Let's just stick with those 10 because there's so many. It goes up to, you know, what does it go down to? 100? Yeah. So this is interesting. Zoom, for the first time, has come up in the top 100 brands. It wasn't there in 2019. But we all know how important Zoom has been and how much revenue and profits it has made. So it is now, it's still, you know, it's a medium-sized company, but it's become a top brand in the world. And what is interesting is if you only focus on the top 10 brands, you can identify which are the purely consumer brands. So Coca-Cola is, well, even Coca-Cola does, I think, B2B as well when they sell into restaurants and hotels. But if you take McDonald's, I think you might say it's a completely B2C company. I don't see McDonald's doing any B2B sales. Disney is more of a B2C company, right? But all the others, they do everything. They do both. Apple, Amazon. Amazon, in fact, its most profitable business is from the cloud service called AWS, which is growing tremendously. You know, a company like Netflix hosts its content on Amazon's cloud. Similarly, Google and Microsoft, they are both in B2C and B2B. Toyota will sell cars to individuals. They'll also sell cars to fleets, to rental companies. So again, you can see some of these companies have actually fallen in value. Apple has gone up in value 38%, Amazon has gone up 60%, Microsoft has gone up 53%, but Google has lost 1% from 2019 to 2020. Toyota has lost 8%, Mercedes 3%, Disney 8%. Why? Because people have stopped visiting Disney theme parks, right? So this is an important resource for you to be aware of if you're interested in marketing. And I think you will see that quite a few of those companies are doing B2B branding. Okay, so now what do you do if you're a company and wants to build a corporate brand which is at the top level? How do you go about it? So you have to start with building your corporate identity. Part of the identity is the strategic choices that you make as a company, which is documented in your mission and vision statement, in your values and culture, and in how strategy is formulated and implemented, right? So we know, for example, from Amazon's website and their mission and vision statement, how committed they are to customer service and low cost. Okay, and that is expressed in terms of its visual identity. You know, what's the logo of Amazon? Does anybody remember? Anybody knows what's the logo of Amazon? It's a little arc of an arrow, right? It's trying to convey transportation or logistics from point A to point B. So that the name Amazon plus that logo is its visual identity, right? We can see Amazon trucks on the road. They will all be painted a certain color. You know, blue is the preferred color of Amazon. And this is how we try to convey the identity to the marketplace, is through the visual elements, the brand name, the brand personality, and so on. You know, a couple of weeks ago, there was a lot of excitement because 2 millionaires went up in space. Sir Richard Branson with Virgin Galactic, and then Jeff Bezos with Amazon. Well, guess what? Sir Richard Branson is the brand personality of all things Virgin, right? The whole Virgin brand, everybody identifies with him. Okay? Amazon used to be identified with Jeff Bezos. Now he's stepping down and we have a new CEO. Elon Musk, it conveys the brand personality of Tesla as being a nerd and being very innovative and taking on very high risks. So do you see how the corporate identity is built on the left? And then, of course, equally important is the corporate reputation, which happens in the marketplace. This is due to the experience of customers, the relationships that the company builds, the communities that it's able to create, both online and offline. And then how do its products perform? And what kind of corporate social responsibility track record do they have? And all of these things. So it is the convergence of the corporate identity and the corporate reputation that creates a corporate brand. Any thoughts? Questions? By the way, for many, many years, for more than a decade, Nokia was one of the top 10 brands in the Interbrand survey. And then after 2007, we saw them go lower and lower. And my guess is that by now they might have fallen off the top 100 because now Nokia is a very different company. It's no more in consumer devices, but it's more into telecommunications infrastructure and services. So it's very much still in existence as a B2B company, but the brand has suffered due to a lack of performance and the reputation in the marketplace. Unfortunate, but that's the way many companies do that. Okay, let's move on then. How do we try, what kinds of tools do we use to communicate with the marketplace in general? We have to see on the left side, what is the cognitive states that we want to move our customers through, from awareness to interest to evaluation to trial and finally purchase. This on the left is the purchase decision process, and the communication objectives are specific to every stage. At the beginning, when something is new, we want to create awareness, then we want to get customers interested, evaluate the product through some demo or benchmarking, then maybe they buy a small amount or do a free trial, and if they like all of that, then they purchase the product. Now, in the middle column is the label that we give to the readiness of the customer. At the beginning, customer is just a lead. A lead means they have some interest, or they may have heard of our company, right? They are aware, that's all. Then if they get interested, they might send an inquiry by registering on the website. Then they might ask for some kind of information. Then they become a prospect. A prospect is warmer than an inquiry or a lead. Prospect might want to attend a webinar. They might want to download a white paper. They might want to actually see a physical demo of the product. Then on trial, they become a new customer. If it's a free trial, they're not yet paying, but sometimes they might buy one machine on a trial basis before they see the results. And then if they see positive results, they will buy more and be committed to the purchase. So on the right, you see the communication tools that are appropriate at every stage. At the beginning, what's most effective is advertising and PR. PR means getting free coverage from the news media, newspapers, television, radio. If they think your product or service is innovative, then they'll give you free coverage. So that's always welcome. Advertising is paid. And then it's what you do on the web with your content and search marketing. That's what it gets you awareness. If you want to generate interest and inquiries, you have to again have a very strong website with good content. Maybe you invite people to webinars or see them at trade shows. Then the next level, what's really important are the field sales visits. That may be a salesperson going on a in-person call or telemarketing by phone or doing some kind of a Zoom call. Again, if you want people to do some trial, this could come out of persuasion from a field sales visit, or maybe there's some exciting promotion on social media. And finally, with your established customers, you want to establish a sales team. Depending on how the customer wants to interact with you, either they want a longer term relationship, in which case you do allocate salespeople to them, or if they want only a transactional relationship, you might do that through e-commerce. So this is the whole array of communication tools that you have. Now, this is something that Petri referred to in his presentation, is how do you do new customer acquisition? We know from his presentation as well as from the farm electronics case that new customer acquisition is not easy, nor is it costless. It's a lengthy process. What this framework reflects is the lengthy process. What are all the steps that the company has to go through? But more than that, it also tells you that there are now some automation tools or software that can help you keep track of how customers are moving through the different stages of the purchase process. So let's start out with the top of the diagram: campaign objectives and target audiences agreed. So you've done your segmentation, targeting and positioning, so you know which is the target audience you want to go after. And you might have some objective, like we are now going to launch a new product, and in our first year we want to achieve sales of X number of units or Y euros in revenue. Now, in order to achieve that, the next step is you might have to have a very good website with creative content, right? You must have all the information that the target audience is interested in, white papers, blogs, right? Things like that. You get them to register on your website, then you start to build your database in the next circle. When you ask them to register, you'll ask for their email address and things of that kind. That gets into the database. Then you might send them a campaign. A campaign is a series of communication messages. It might start out with just a welcome email. Then if you're having a webinar, you might invite them to a webinar, right? If you're going to have some other events, you might invite them to those. So when you execute the campaign, which may consist of multiple messages, then some of the target will respond. They might say, yes, I'm signing up for the webinar, or yes, I'm downloading this web white paper. So then this marketing automation software will track who are the people who have engaged more with us. And then you can actually score each lead, depending on how much engagement they've had with you, you give them points. For example, registration might get you 1 point, right? If you download a white paper, that might get the customer 5 points. If you attend a webinar, that might give the customer 10 points. So you add those up and you might say that, okay, any customer whose lead generation score exceeds 25 is then a nice warm prospect. So we will now hand it over to the sales force. So then it gets into another software called CRM, Customer Relationship Management, where now the salespeople will put the activities in. They'll actually enter, have they made any Zoom calls? Have they visited the customer? Has a proposal been submitted? What's the value of the order? When is it expected? These are all things that go into nurturing the lead. And then if you're successful, the customer will give you order, and across all your customers, across time, in a quarter, you will get a performance dashboard. This is how many units we've sold. This is our revenue. This is our profit. And then you can fine tune this for the next campaign. So this is how we use, and there are many softwares available. Marketing automation has branded software like Eloqua from Oracle. There's also Pardot from Salesforce. There's Marketo, Marketo. So there's lots of companies which are in marketing automation software. When you get into CRM, Salesforce is the big one, but there are a number of other smaller ones as well. And at least in the US, we are seeing our bachelor's students, when they graduate from our program, if they can get into positions where they become a specialist in this marketing software, there are plenty of jobs available. This is getting into the area of marketing analytics. So you can see that the whole purpose is to substitute what was earlier a completely manual process. When I was a young salesperson in India, we had no tools like these. We had spreadsheets, or we filled out paper forms. But now this whole automation has made things so much more efficient, so that salespeople don't have to do that much of paperwork, and they can focus more on trying to be persuasive with the customer. I'm going to stop because I see a chat. I'm sorry, the slides are a little difficult to read. Okay, so I'm doing it in the presenter mode in PowerPoint. Let's see how I can do this. View, zoom. Yeah, it's difficult for me because I'm in PowerPoint. I'm not able to. Let's see again. Oh yeah, if I click on each of these, maybe the font size can be increased. Yes. Okay. I've increased the font size. Is this better?
We can't see.
You're not.
Oh,
Yeah, you're
I'm
not sharing your
I'm
screen.
not sharing my screen. So you can see it a little bit bigger, the font.
Yeah, those the previous thing was it was showing it in some weird way, which made it hard to read. But now it's showing it normally, so it's better. Thank you.
How about the earlier ones? This was also not visible.
It was visible. You could read this. The other one had just such small font on the circles that it was hard to follow.
Okay. Do you want me to go over the circles again?
No.
Okay.
For me, it was fine. At least I could follow from your speech, but it was just the visuals were not really.
Okay. And again, I think you have access to these in my courses, so it might be easier for you to just download and open those up if it's, easier for you to follow, but we'll do our best. How about this one? Influence of information from different sources. Can you read this?
Yeah, it looks. I can see it fine.
Okay. So this is the result of some research which shows that, when customers try to assess whether some information is reliable or valid, they place different credibility on different sources of information. And what is quite visible is that the first four on the left have a greater influence than the three on the right. And what you can see is that all four on the left are a little bit more personal. A colleague or friend does some recommendation, or some intermediaries give you the recommendation. Intermediaries are like wholesalers. Okay. The supplier's website, which is quite tailored, social media platforms. These are all higher credibility sources than, for example, display ads or just organic search on Google. Okay. So again, this tells you that perhaps personal communication is a little bit more important than in B2B marketing than in impersonal communications. These are some guidelines for how to design and create good websites so that it performs the communication function well. Yeah, the second point is very interesting. Express the identity of the organization that lies behind the website. Do you see now, any good website, any company website will have an About Us page. This was not so a few years ago. And even now, some of the less sophisticated websites will not have an About Us page, but I think it's become default, mandatory. You must have About Us along with the team. This is our team. This is their mugshots. This is their profiles. You've got to create a story, right? You see how nice a story Vario created through its website. You have to have a right tone of voice, not too arrogant, and something that conveys honesty and integrity, values, philosophy, FAQs for those who want more detail. Chatbots. Now, so many websites, immediately when you go there, a box pops up, a window, and they say, "Can I help you?" Right? So those are things that are trying to create a good impression and make the website more personal and human-like. Content marketing is again a huge area for jobs nowadays. If you can write well, companies need people to write and participate in the website through good, copy. You want to explain technical products and services. You want to produce white papers based on research, participate in company blogs. A company blog is something that's on the company's website, where you have more control. You can have, other social media websites like Reddit, where people are discussing your products and services, but you don't have much control over that. So they could be saying wrong things, and it's difficult to control. So company blogs are a good addition to what social media is available publicly, but it does require then some company employees to participate on a regular basis and engage with customers. You can have advertisements. You can have not only online display ads, but you can have print ads in trade journals. If you look at Financial Times or you look at the Wall Street Journal, these are read by business people. So many times technical products and services may be advertised in those journals. Usually B2B marketeers prefer a rational approach to an emotional message, right? You have to demonstrate how your product or service can save costs or earn more revenue or profits for the customer. It's always good to provide information in a rational approach ad, present logic, present evidence. And then you can use symbolism and metaphors for your selling proposition. Part of, when we talk of positioning, something that is important is a unique selling proposition, which the salespeople can then use with their customers. A unique selling proposition example might be, in the consumer domain, when I say the brand name Volvo, Volvo, what comes to your mind? Anybody?
Their cars.
Yeah. Anything else? What about their cars?
I would say the safety.
Yes. Was that Rasmus?
Yes.
So for many, many decades, Volvo's unique selling proposition has been safety. Even today, if you do focus groups, now Volvo is not objectively the only safe car. There are many others that can match the safety specifications of Volvo. But that is what the consumers remember. That is unique. In spite of 3 decades, Volvo has retained that positioning. Okay. Another thing you'll notice that, when you use metaphors, you might say that, if I'm a manufacturer of foundries for ceramics, right? Then I might say I'm the Rolls Royce of the ceramics manufacturers, which is a metaphor. We know Rolls Royce is a very high-end car. So our product, the furnace, is at the highest end of all the competitors, right? That's what metaphor means. You take something from another industry and you apply it to what is familiar to customers. Okay. So this is how you try to craft good positioning and advertising messages. Trade shows are another important avenue for B2B marketeers. Pre-COVID, this used to be in person. Now there are many platforms that enable you to participate in trade shows online. It's not the same, but again, trade shows are where buyers and sellers meet, and they can get all this information about which suppliers are available, and get to know them, things of that nature. Yeah, here is some research that shows why do people attend trade shows. Mainly, you'll see the highest percentages are in the first row. Sales and marketing and general managers want to see new products and developments at trade shows. So a lot of the next generation products are or prototypes are exhibited there before they come to the marketplace. So it's a very good source of market intelligence. Now, this again on the left tells you what is the purchase decision process in B2B, from need recognition to supplier selection. In the middle, you have what are the objectives and tasks. But the most interesting part about this is the graphic on the right. What tools are effective at different stages of the buying process? So, right up front, when the need is to generate awareness, okay, what is highly effective is advertising, and what is not effective is personal selling. Now, if you take personal selling, it's low at the initial stages, but its importance increases as you proceed down the decision funnel. As you go more towards supplier selection, it increases. On the other hand, the effectiveness of advertising is high in generating awareness, but the effectiveness reduces as you go towards supplier selection. That's so interesting. That means if you want to generate awareness, if you want people just to know about your product and brand, then non-personal sources of communication like advertising are very effective. But later on, you have to reduce the amount you spend on advertising and increase the amount you spend on personal selling, because after awareness, the focus seems to shift towards conversion. How do you get some customer who's interested to actually buy the product or service? That might require some face-to-face interaction and persuasion. That's what this graphic is showing. Okay, so we covered chapter 7. I want to pause here and again see if you have any questions or comments or experiences to share.
I would like to ask a question. One question, just about the print. You're talking about B2B print ads. What are the B2B print ads? You said they're kind of different from consumer ads, but like, are they supposed to? If they're trying to hit a broad audience, should they not are they not going to use the same tactics generally? Like if you're trying to, let's say you're Coca-Cola and you're selling to restaurants, like you should, like generally that I don't see a different marketing strategy than the previous one. Like, what are you gonna say? Like, oh yeah, Coca-Cola is the most sold product of whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, let's stay with the Coke example. A lot of Coke's business comes from restaurants, bars, hotels, right? And what is of real concern to these people is the dispensing equipment. You have to have a fountain. It's not just opening bottles, right? You have to have things on tap. So the freshness of the beverage, right? How much does it cost to convert syrup? Mostly Coca-Cola supplies syrup to the restaurants and bars. And then they actually mix the carbon dioxide with it in-house. And that gets into the tap. Okay? So the cost of these is something that will matter. So, for example, Coke could do some innovation and come up with some dispensing equipment that maybe cuts costs 10% compared to Pepsi, right? Then it will try to put that message in maybe some specialized trade journals. The buyers of Coke and Pepsi might read some food and beverage magazines, right? So everything is different, from the needs, from the value proposition to the media that you select, right? And again, Coke is something which has a lot of history. So I'm not sure how much scope there is for innovation. But just take a company like Vario or Farm Electronics. You know, they have such a great opportunity to educate the market through advertising in general, and perhaps print ads if their customers read some specialized magazines. You know, if something like Vario is so general and you want to target designers, you know, designers in the auto industry, right? There'll be certain design publications. I don't even know what their names are, but I'm sure product designers have some specialized magazines that they read. And maybe Vario needs to get its message into those. And, you know, before we had Petri speak to you, I was with him a few minutes earlier, and I was telling him that you guys really need to position XR as a new category, because most people are familiar with VR and AR, but we don't know what is mixed reality. That's what they are calling XR. So really, Vario needs to push this concept of what is XR, and then to say that we are on the forefront of XR. Do you see? Which is a very specialized message. So again, there are similarities. The objectives are same. The purchase processes is quite similar, but the exact content of the messages and the media that you select can be quite different. Good question. Any others would like to ask any questions or clarifications? Hafiz says lecture recordings are not available. I think I've posted them on the My Courses page. Are you not able to see them, Hafiz?
Yeah, I checked there, but it is saying this video is unavailable.
All of them, there's like 3 or 4.
Yeah.
How about somebody else? Can you please try? Are you able to not see the videos?
It's the same for me.
Huh. Anybody else? Because I'm able to, I verified I'm able to see them. Let me try once more if it's something idiosyncratic today.
Yeah, for me, the videos, the recordings doesn't work.
Yeah, it just says video not available for me too.
Okay. So I need to investigate that. Let me see what's going on here in my. Yeah, this is weird. I'm able to see it. I'm able to see them. Is there something in the settings that I need to do?
I believe it's probably then the fact that they're not shared publicly. If they're not publicly available, that makes sense. You can see them, and the rest
Right. I had set it to private. Okay, so thank you, Eric. I will do that right after class. So Hafiz, please check back after about 10 minutes and you'll have access to them. I just need to go to YouTube and convert the setting from private to public.
Okay, thanks.
And yeah, sure, you can stay back after everybody else logs off, and I'm happy to talk with you. So I'll end the class. Thank you, everybody, and I'll see you tomorrow at 1800. Have a great evening. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay. Actually, as my background is not marketing, so I'm having some difficulties to understand it. But these 2 days lectures are very like